The story begins with a particular moment in time. It says, in the days of Caesar Augustus. And this is very important that it says this because it is there to prove that this is not a pretend story. This is not a made up story. I'm a person who particularly loves Star Wars. I was 5 years old when those movies first came out in the late 70s, but Star Wars is a fairy tale. The story always begins the same. It always starts a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's a pretend story. But the story of Jesus is no fairy tale. It actually happened at a particular moment in our history. Luke makes that clear, for he opens by saying, in the days of Caesar Augustus, not a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, not once upon a time, but he mentions a particular time in history that anyone who lived around in that time and place could have pointed to. In the days of Caesar Augustus, when the whole world was Roman, a decree was issued for a census to be taken, and everybody had to go to the town of their birth, which meant that they had to travel to basically fill out papers, to be counted, and let the government know who was alive and who is in their family, and do they have any more kids since the last time the census was taken. So Luke opens the Christmas story by setting the stage. He recalls a moment in time that people would have remembered and says, do you remember the census of 5 BC when everybody had to make that long journey to wherever they were from? Well, that is the time when Mary and Joseph, he said, had to travel all the way to Bethlehem to register. And a census like this would have been a terrible inconvenience for this young couple awaiting the birth of their first child. An inconvenience for a couple of reasons. First, because Bethlehem was 100 miles away from where they lived in Nazareth. And the only way for Joseph and Mary to be able to get there was to walk or to ride a donkey. And it is over desert and rivers and a small mountain plains of Galilee just to get there. It would have taken at least a week, maybe more, and it would have been dangerous for them and all of that. But they had to do it. It was the law. But this was also an inconvenience because Mary and Joseph had no say in the matter. They were living in Caesar land and they had to go register for a census. Why? Because it meant that Caesar wanted more taxes from them. And they were already poor. So it was like twisting the knife. So everything about this moment in time seemed like a bad thing was going on. And I want you to think just a little bit. Have you ever noticed how often when it feels like things are going wrong, you look back at them and it was just what needed to happen? When things look like they were falling apart, they were actually falling right into place. Or when you think that things couldn't get any worse, and when it appears to be another bad thing that you are powerless to change, God is actually up to something and he is leading you somewhere and it's going to change your world. I'm serious. How often have things happened that we didn't want to happen, or even were just a thorn in our flesh, a frustration, and then later we realized it was the best thing that could have happened? Because it led to this, which led to that, which looking back, it was as if God knew all the time what he was doing and orchestrating it all. For example, 20 years ago, next Saturday, marks a day in my life that I will never forget. One that I am deeply thankful for, that started out as a day of horrible frustration. It was January 4th, 2000, and I was a seminary student studying to be a pastor, and I was in charge of the university post office at North Park. I was in charge of collecting and sorting the mail and delivering it to all the departments and students. Well, I had a team of students who did all the grunt work, and I sat in my office and managed. But on January 4th, 2000, it was the end of winter break, and most of the students were on vacation, and a couple of students backed out on me the night before, and I found myself all alone doing everything myself, with a mountain of mail to sort and a counter to oversee, and then rush to get it out to all of the departments. It was just one of those days. I mean, it wasn't a major deal, but it was a day that I remember grumbling under my breath that I had to do everything, and where was so-and-so, and how could they skip out on today, and I must not be a very good boss running my office like this. People aren't respecting me and coming in. And it was just one of those days. And I sorted it all, and I gathered the mail, and I put it in the bins, and I'm walking it around my car to all the departments, which I never did. And I went up to the 3rd floor of Old Main, rushing around. And I brought the mail to the business office there, and I had to also collect some change for the cash register. And as I get off of the elevator and I walk towards that department, all of a sudden, my world seemed to stop, and everything just got slow. I mean, angels didn't come out or anything, but this woman in a green dress with amazing eyes did, and a smile that I think was created for me, and she just started walking towards me. And I gave her the mail, and she gave me some money for the register. And as I've told this story before, everybody makes fun of me when I do. But when our hands touched, something was there. And I felt it, that my life was about to change. And it did. For the woman in the green dress was that woman right down there, my wife, Carrie. And this was the day I met her. A day that began as a flop and a frustration when I didn't want to do what I had to do, what I normally didn't do, and I ended up what I normally wasn't, meeting who would become such an important part of my life. And I cannot help but think that God had a hand in that. Did he cause my employees to stay home at the last minute? How did he get me to the 3rd floor? I don't pretend to understand all of the mystery. But the next day, when my employees were back on the job, who do you think was delivering mail to the business office? Me again. And 2 days later, Carrie and I were on our first date. Let's hear it for the boy right here. But I tell you that long story, which may be not appropriate for Christmas Eve, I don't know. But because when I read details like this in the Bible, that Caesar is enforcing a census, and people had to go to faraway places to register. And so that's why Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem in the first place, which is exactly where the prophets foretold that Christ would be born. And sure enough, when they arrived, the baby is born, and the particular shepherds that God wanted there were right there in the fields nearby, and the star was in place over. And when I read this, I think, man, God is orchestrating all things. The universe and the stars, even crazy Caesar, who doesn't realize he's a part of God's plan as he's creating that census. But this is what happens when we start to live by faith. We start to realize that things happen for a reason, and that things are not falling apart. They're falling right into place just as he had planned. As Galatians 4:4 says, at the perfect moment, God sent his son. And sure, it was tough. I'm sure Mary and Joseph were frustrated the whole way along. But they are right where God wanted them to be. And God was there, and he was watching over, and he was leading them. And it was perfect. Because Joseph was from the line of David, and so Jesus would be born in the same town as David was. And that's important to our story because Jesus was the promised Messiah to be king on David's throne and over his kingdom forever and ever. This is what the prophet said. So God is telling the story in every detail. Now, when Mary and Joseph arrive in Bethlehem, they don't get the royal treatment. God doesn't pull out the red carpet for them, as we know, but it continues to be a story of struggle. And let that be a lesson to us and to our kids, that just because you're in a struggle does not mean that you are out of God's will, for God still has you. And we are told that Joseph and Mary, they could find no place to stay. How frustrating and discouraging it must have been for them. They have done everything that God has asked, and still nobody will open up their place to them. For a pregnant woman, they are all alone, it would seem. But then they find a stable. It becomes their home for a night or a while. And now the Bible, it's interesting, never says what we traditionally tell, that there was an inn and an innkeeper who turned Mary and Joseph away, but then had a change of heart and gave them a stable out back for the night. It doesn't exactly say that in the Bible, but it could be implied. For the Bible only really says that a time came for the baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn. They wrapped him in cloths. The word is rags. And they laid him in a manger because there's no guest room available. That's what it says. But we have assumed that it was a stable that Mary and Joseph were in because that's where a manger would have been. Outside, in the barn, so to speak. And a manger was a stone basin where sheep and other animals would have eaten out of. And so baby Jesus would have been born in a stable. He would have been laid in a manger with straw as his bed and rags as his clothes. Hardly what we would expect for the Son of God, the promised Messiah, the King of Kings. And we don't know if the stable was provided by a nice innkeeper or if it was maybe in one of Joseph's family who opened it up for him, who lived in Bethlehem. We don't know. It is also possible that there was no room for them anywhere, and so they just found a cave as shelter for the night, because stables were not barns made of wood, they were caves. And there are hundreds of these caves near and around Bethlehem. And they've been used for thousands of years by the Bethlehem shepherds who bring their sheep in on stormy nights. And you can still see on the ceilings of these caves the smoke stains of shepherds who built fires for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so maybe all the Bible is telling us is that first Christmas, Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem. There's no place for them anywhere to go. No inn has vacancy. Nobody in Joseph's family has opened up a place for them. And so the best thing that they can do is find shelter in one of the caves of the shepherds for them to stay. Today, the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem is the oldest church still standing. It was built in the 3rd century over the cave that has traditionally been recognized as the place that Jesus was born. And there's a long line to enter into that cave where you can see on the floor of that cave a star where people come and remember. It was a humble place where Jesus was born, God's Son, not in a palace, not even in a home. No one gave him special treatment. Perhaps no one even knew except for Mary and Joseph, but alone in a stable in a cave with a bed of straw and nothing but rags to wrap him in. This is the story of Christmas. From the lowest of places came the highest of kings. And when that baby was born, we're told angel came to shepherds outside in the fields. And it started as just one angel, and then suddenly the skies were full of them, and the glory of the Lord shone all around them, and they were afraid. Heaven was rejoicing that first Christmas night. And the angel tells them, don't be afraid. We bring you good news of great joy that's going to be for all people. Go to Bethlehem, you're going to find him. He's going to be wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. And then suddenly the great company, heavenly hosts appear. And can you imagine the whole sky being full of this? And they praise God and they say, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to whom his favor rests. And back then, and you've probably heard this before, but shepherds were near the bottom of the totem pole when it came to class and society. They were seen as the least and the last, and they were often kids. And they were dirty, living outside most of the time with their sheep. They even had a reputation for being thieves and sinners. Society had rejected them, but Jesus had come for them. God had invited them. And this is important because that they are the ones that the angels came to, because it tells us that Jesus is good news, not just for some, but for all of us sinners, for a whole world. For all the rejects and the outcasts and the marginalized and the pushed around and the broken and the lost and the needy ones, Jesus has come for all. Not just for the best and the brightest and the most religious or the knowledgeable or the good enoughs, but the poor and the humble shepherd. God sees you and loves you, and he didn't just come for some. He came for all. And that makes me rejoice tonight because I'm a nobody in a great big world, and yet to him I am a somebody. That God would love me, that he would know me, and that instead of condemning me, he would send his son to save me. To get upon a cross and do everything that I could not do, that I might know him, love him, experience his peace, and have eternal life tomorrow. As Romans 3:21 says, there's now a righteousness available to us apart from the law, which we were powerless to keep. God made a way by sending his son. I also think it's perfect that he invited shepherds, because the Old Testament prophet said the Lord would be our shepherd. He would go out and he would seek us and he would find us. And when we lose our way, he would gather us back, and he would be the good shepherd who would lay down his life for us. And so it's so fitting that the shepherds would be there at his birth, because the Lord is our shepherd. And the shepherds are great because when they hear the good news, they don't just stay put. They get up and they go and they look for him. They go together, and they must have walked those streets of Bethlehem until they found him. And sure enough, they come to the cave where Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus is lying there in the manger. And when they find him, it says they rejoice because it was just like the angels had told them. And after worshiping, what do? They go out and they tell anybody that they can. And I love that the shepherds go and seek him. They don't stay put. They go seek and find him. And this becomes a model for all of us. He invites every one of us to believe in him and to go find him. And that if we seek him, we will find him. If we open his word, we will find him. If we open up our heart and start praying, we will hear him. If we get involved and start pursuing him and obeying him, we will know him. He will make himself known to us. If we seek, we will find. And the only other thing I want to say tonight is Mary. Mary, she does something incredible. It says she treasures up all of this, and she just ponders it in her heart. And I always find myself on Christmas doing that. Just sitting for a minute. I always seem to find a quiet place somewhere. And I just think about all that God has done in my life throughout the course of the journey. I think about that third floor Old Main. I think about 7-year-old praying with my dad in my room to accept Christ. I think about 12-year-old at camp when the message just hit my heart. I think about all the ways that God provided for me. I think about all the people that he's put in my life for a reason. I think about all the sins that he has forgiven that I got. And I just sit there and all I can do is just ponder it in my heart. And I just have to thank him again for Christmas. And maybe that's a good place to be in tonight. Because Christ was born for you. He knows you. He knows everything. And he loves you already. And he's already done everything. All you got to do is say thank you.